Welcome to Inflection Point Conversations. I'm Michelle Obeda, an art director and 3D artist. In this podcast series, I'll be interviewing experts in the fields of art, architecture, and visualization. Together, we will take a deep dive into the disruptive topics that have reached an inflection point in our industry. Today, I'm talking with Yulia Arzhantseva. Yulia is a co-founder and a lead 3D artist at Ymages, which opened its doors in September this year. It's a visualization studio based in New York that focuses on photorealistic and conceptual renders. Yulia got her Bachelor of Architecture at Cal Poly in 2014. After that, she moved to Europe, where she worked in a few architecture studios as a 3D artist, modeler, and interior designer. Eventually, professional interest led her back to the States to work in New York before founding her studio. Apart from Viz work, she often works on creative projects like Re-Ymagined, and she's one of the judges at the Rookies, a CGI competition for graduate artists. Welcome, Yulia.
Hi, Michelle. Thank you for having me.
It's great to have you here. I'd love to start off with a question about what got you interested in architecture in the first place.
That's an interesting one. So I'm actually from Ukraine, and I have grown up there. And my whole life I've lived, if you've probably seen those Soviet Union block type of apartments. Yeah. That's kind of the architecture I've been seeing until I was about 14, and that's the one I moved to the United States, and a whole new world opened up. I still remember being at 14 in New York for the first time, and I think I had a headache just from the vibrations happening in the city. But ever since then, coming from this, monotone Soviet, post-Soviet architecture into United States, New York, it was quite just shocking and interesting. And then, being in high school, I started looking at what would be interesting thing to do. And luckily, Cal Poly was right there. Cal Poly had a pretty strong architectural program. So I applied, and that's how it started.
Awesome. Yeah, I bet, coming to New York for the first time. I also came here for the first time at 14, and it was just like the most exciting place. Yeah. So you started your Arch Viz studio called Ymages with a Y this year with your co-founder. How was the process of setting up your studio?
It was quite organic, to be honest. I started out as an in-house renderer here in New York. So that led me to, know a lot of people who are architects, and designers, interior designers. Then I went on to work at Arch Viz Studio, The Boundary, and then just having those connections with the architects from previously working at architecture studio led to a lot of people messaging me sometimes and being, hey, I know you do this and this and this. So it started with a lot of freelance work at first. And then it's starting to pick up a lot more. The work that I knew that, I need more help. I started reaching out to people. And naturally, it led to the fact, this is becoming bigger. More people are reaching out. So let's start an LLC, go through the whole, official steps of opening a business in New York, starting, financial accounts, all these things, hiring people on, and then, pushing the website, things like that. So it was quite organic. It was fast, but quite organic. But yeah, that's how we're here now.
That's great. Yeah, that's exciting. How many people do you have in your studio at the moment?
So, including me, it'll be 3 there all the time, constantly just working. But then with certain projects, if it's a bigger project, we do hire people on per project based.
Yeah. What about the clients? Have you managed to grow your client base? Are you still got like a lot of recurring clients?
Both. So it happened with having, those work connections and people I know. And first it started with word of mouth. So, I worked with somebody, they went working somewhere else, and then they recommended you to their colleagues. From there, having that is I do have clients that I've worked with since, 5-6 years now, just starting freelance with them.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I now have new clients like coming on board. And usually what happens is that big offices, international offices, once you work with for instance, their New York office, pretty soon you have their, say, Miami office reaching out to you. So it's growing in that field.
Yeah. Did you always want to start your own business?
Thinking about it, it's not really that I grew up and woke up every morning thinking, I'm going to be a business woman, business lady. I think it all came naturally. I worked in a few places in Europe. So I worked in Poland, in Ukraine. I also worked, the Boundaries London-based office here in New York as well, California. Seeing offices run certain ways and different ways always had me thinking about ways of, I wonder how I would do it, right? So looking at how things are being resolved or not resolved. And when freelancing came around, I was thinking back to all those places I used to work at, things I learned, things I've seen people do. So, say naturally just started thinking about, well, what if this becomes something bigger? And so thinking about that led me to thinking, well, let's try, see how it goes. Yeah.
And how many years did you work freelance?
I have to count.
Yeah.
So I think about 3.
And did you did you enjoy working freelance? Did it suit you? I know that I feel like it suits some people and some people find it a little bit intimidating.
I did a lot of freelance work while I was working full time. So a lot of that freelance work was happening on Saturdays and Sundays or evenings,
Right.
sometimes overnight. It was always nice to have it because it was a little bit exciting to step outside of the usual work that I was doing at the moment. A lot of the work in New York especially is office based, it's mostly office amenities, offices. So sometimes I would have work coming in. One of my first freelance projects was actually a bank/social gathering space in China.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So that was such an unusual project, which was exciting to work in outside of your standard kind of New York office amenities.
Yeah. So it gave you kind of a difference. Was it quite nice to do something a little different in your evening versus what you do all the time in the day? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And then, so having that freelance outside of work was interesting. Sometimes it was stressful. I do understand why for some people it's not as enjoyable because you are the front man, right? You are the person that is responsible for finances, you're responsible for contract, you're responsible for the work. So you are wearing all of the hats of your typical studio at the same time.
And looking for work, I think the other thing is constantly having to look for new work, to line up new work to go once your current project finishes. I guess that's the other stress, right?
That's stress definitely one of the things that scares people off from freelancing. I feel it's the fact that if you're a full-time freelancer, right, you not just have to worry about the clients, you also have to worry about things like health insurance and other sort of things. You're not you are sort of getting all of the profit, but at the same time you're completely responsible for yourself at that moment.
Yeah, I guess once you get established and you have a bit more experience doing it, does it become a little bit less scary?
It becomes a little bit less scary because you do have a network of clients and you know that these clients are doing this type of work. And so if anything, you can always reach out, you can always ask, you can always say, hey, there is free time available. Are you in the process of doing any projects? I mean, once you have a network established, it's easier to know what could be a possible next project.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. So tell me about the website Arch Viz World that you recently started.
Yeah, that was a side project that I had. Being here kind of goes all the way back to being, here as an in-house renderer. Back then, working there, being in New York, I knew maybe about only 5 ArchViz studios, the top big, the top 10 ones that we all know. And all of them are usually in London, New York, Milan, Paris, Australia. So I was thinking, well, there has to be more, because when you go on Instagram or any other social media, you usually always see these small boutique studios and you never know where they are. And I was thinking to myself, coming from a small city, I wonder what those artists who are in other parts of the United States, for instance, Idaho, like Boise, Idaho, or something like this, what are their options for this industry? I researched a little bit, and I found, all these little cities, and I was thinking, well, I wonder if there is a resource where you can actually, if you're looking for an ArchViz studio, like if, can find where they're located. And at the time, I didn't really find anything. So it started more of like this side project during, I think, one of those Christmas breaks, where I just had a spreadsheet of these studios in their cities. And they decided, well, let's do a website, right? Like it will be a simple website where you can just go in, you either click on the city or you click on the studio and find where they are. And the intent was maybe it will help somebody to find work near them if they're not in New York or London. Yeah. So now we have archviz.world. And if you're an ArchViz artist, you can go on it and you can research ArchViz studios by city or country.
Yeah, it's great. I'm going to put the link in the description, so you should definitely check it out. And have you found many people have given you feedback that they found employment through it or have found it useful as a resource?
So no one reached out saying, hey, I found my job through this website, but I definitely know that a lot of people have used them to find offices to give them work. For instance, I had a friend who reached out for me. He's an architect, and but not here in New York, in California. He said, "Hey, you know what? I'm looking for an ArchViz artist or a studio, pretty small. I need them to do this job." And at the moment, I said, "You know what? I don't really know anybody in California, but here's the website. You can find somebody in Santa Monica or LA." Because they're locally based, so they wanted to work with somebody locally based. So I do know of somebody using that website to give work to a studio.
Yeah, I bet. I mean, I found it fascinating to see where their studios, apart from like you said, the major cities, to find that their studios in smaller towns as well is fascinating. And also, I mean, it seems obvious, but you don't know where they are. It's great. Do you feel a strong connection to the ArchViz community? I guess that website is a big part of highlighting the community. And I know that you are a judge on the rookies competition, which is sort of brings the big ArchViz community together as well as other CGI art. Do you feel that's important to you?
Yes, absolutely. And you mean connection to ArchViz community here in the United States or in Europe? Because those are two different communities. Having lived in Ukraine and Poland, in Europe, the ArchViz community is very large. It's very connected. It's always has some sort of events, conferences, talks, meetings, which I think is extremely important. Coming here to the United States and New York, it's not as strong and developed here, but I know that with 3D New York, it's becoming better. And having lived in both places and experienced both sides of that, I do think that it's absolutely important. It's probably one of the most important things that we can do. The nature of our work is quite alienating, right? We are usually sitting at the computer for long hours working on an image. Even in the studio, when you get a project, each artist usually has their own image they're working on. And so sometimes you can go for hours without really having brainstorming or discussions or things like that. You are not having such as a social works process. So getting out of that, getting out of your office, out of your studio, meeting somebody, talking about things is, that's probably the most valuable things we can get for ourselves, learning from each other. And other things, we do have to talk about things like finances. We have to talk about salaries. We have to talk about like workloads, deadlines, clients, because I know everyone's a little bit like kind of like in, studios by studios. And if we don't have that community, then, you'll be clients against us in a way. If you know what I'm trying to say, right? Like we need to discuss those things and present and be honest with each other, because we're all in the same boat here.
I bet that's also, did you find it even more important, for one thing, when you went freelance, and for another thing, when you started your own studio, you needed a little bit more, I guess, a bit more connection with other artists and other people who have their own studio to find this information.
Exactly. You know, I have a few people that always reach out, and actually recently a friend just went from architecture to Arch Viz. So she reached out to me because she didn't really know about Arch Viz community. And she was like, I need to talk to somebody because, for instance, in terms of finance, someone's telling me this price they're charging for an image, and another person's telling me a completely different price they're charging for an image. So I don't know what to do. And I think, we need to talk about it. We need to be honest, just so we, things like that help each other. And also going from working in studio to freelance to running a studio, you have to know what's happening outside. You have to know what's happening in other studios, how they dealt with it, obviously, and help her solve these problems. And I think it's important for us to grow bigger as an industry. And support each other. So having a community is probably one of the most things that we can do.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. The community in Europe is a lot bigger and wider spread. And is that something that you'd like to see grow in the States?
Yeah.
Me
the other
too.
day, I was actually researching if there are any Arch Viz conferences here. In Europe, there's always some sort of, I know there's D2, right? There is also 3D Triad just happened in Poland. I think there's one happening in Portugal. But what I'm trying to say,
and there's one in Venice, right?
Yeah. There's so many of those events that are happening, and I think everyone really enjoys them. And that's one of the things that I miss about not being in Europe right now is that, you can't just hop on a half an hour train ride. And I was actually researching if we have any here in the United States.
Yeah, what have you found? I feel like I've heard of a few, like, but they're a little bit, more broad. Like, for example, South by Southwest, that's in Austin, right? Texas. It's quite a far travel. It's like maybe the same distance to Europe. And I heard of one that was in Las Vegas as well, but again, it's pretty far away. It would be great for
Rio or the Autodesk.
I think so. Yeah. So again, it's a little bit wider, like broader. I think something like the D2 conference is a little bit more specific, and that kind of community would be great we can ask Fabio to start one in New York. Maybe he'd love to come here.
I think so. I think he'll enjoy it. Yeah, so that's why I am missing a little bit of that community.
Because I think also, I don't know if you found this, since people started, during COVID, started working more remotely, there's been a lot less in-person connection, and that's meant that you'd have to try harder to find people to meet up with in person. That's why I really was excited to help bring back a 3D meetup and to see it happening, and would like to keep see it keep happening. I think it's important as well.
Yeah, I agree.
So, question for you, what are the challenges that a boutique-sized studio like Ymages face compared to a larger studio? What do you think?
So, well, one of them is, we're small size. So when a client comes in with a large project, you have to assure them that we can still do it. So things like that. So having to then put on a lot of hats, right? So a recent project was the recent project that we did was with Willy Wonka, and one of the things was that all of the props and things, it's not the items you can find on 3D Sky or CG Trader because they're also customly produced. You know, a chocolate cherry tree. You know, not something you find in certain candies and things like that, and certain items from Willy Wonka's outfit. So for that, right, you have to then go and find a 3D modeler that is experienced in that. If you're a bigger studio, you usually have, you know, 20, 30 people working. So usually you have a few good 3D modelers that are experienced in specifically that. So one of the things is that small amount of people, so you either have to have more than one talent, or you have to then go and look for people that can help on the project.
Yeah.
So,
and what about like rendering and things? Have you made good use of like cloud rendering versus having a whole render farm yourself, I guess?
Yeah, not having a farm is something that I really felt after leaving Arch Viz studio. We use a lot of the cloud-based rendering. So it's either a Rebus farm or Garage farm. Those make me a little nervous sending a job there. But honestly, they've been working great. We did a few animations now for like, you know, a minute or so long, which takes a lot of rendering time. But also, you know, that's kind of a thing that adds to it. You have to be conscious about the fact that now, when you're working with that, right, if you're using a cloud rendering farm, you have to now calculate that into your cost, right? Like that's an extra cost as a small boutique firm. You're not, you know, you don't have 20 computers sitting in your office. Yeah. So that's another thing. It's having that large rendering power.
Yes. I think you missed that. I feel like if I put myself in your position, I think the first thing I'd miss was like not having a farm.
Yeah.
What's your favorite part of your day-to-day work?
Day-to-day work. Well, the first sip of coffee, that's my favorite part.
Yeah.
So typically what happens is that while we work on a project, I would have a few meetings with the client throughout the day. Some of them are kind of project touch base, going over the comments and then passing the comments over to a team member that's working on those images or not. I do say that, you know, some people say that meetings are not their favorite part. It's also not my super favorite part, but I do like to talk to clients about it because sometimes we have a client join and they have an idea in their head, but not precisely like clear. So talking with them over it sometimes is so amazing when you almost storyboard with them at the same time and you suggest something and they get so excited and you can see that, you know, kind of spark and then they go, oh, and what if we do this? And then we do that. And then you have to say, okay, let's think about that. But, you know, it's the exciting storyboarding with them. And I like seeing people get excited, especially marketing team, because they first get on a call and they start thinking about, okay, how this image is going to sell. But then we start talking actually about the story that we're talking about and they get more excited about it. So I think I do like that part during the client meetings.
Yeah. I love the beginning part of the process. I feel like that's how the very start of the image before you start doing any work is to like have the ideas at the beginning. Yeah. Tell me about your project that you've been working on, Re-Ymagined. I love this project where you turn well-known paintings into a render. Can you tell me how it started and why you did it?
That was actually from 2018. So I just calculated it's going to be six years now of that project. Since that project in 2014, 2024. So it started when I was very new to 3D rendering, and if you remember a lot of the tutorials on, when you're just starting in this field, they usually suggest you should take a photograph and try to recreate it, like, so you can learn how to do the proper natural lighting based on the photograph. At that time, I think it was also around this holiday time, so we went to a lot of museums around here in New York, and I caught myself thinking, I was like, wow, they choose such natural and sometimes very beautiful lighting with just paints. So just for the fun of it, and just for kind of doing a little dust, I was like, what if I take one of the paintings? And the first one was Van Gogh, the cafe at night. And I tried doing it in 3D. And I was like, wow, this actually is kind of cool. This is very interesting. So then I found the next painting and the next one, and I just got so immersed in solving the lighting technique that's been, shown in this painting, trying to recreate it in 3D, using fake lights sometimes, invisible lights, trying to figure out how do I do it that it matches the painting. So then this idea just came to life was, well, let's try and recreate these paintings without the people in it. And interestingly, but that project just blew up. It kind of did a lot of media coverage. I think it's still getting a lot of media coverage because in 2020,
awesome.
when COVID happened and people were gone from cafes and streets and in places, those 3D renderings of paintings
I
without
see.
people, they became so
Yeah.
relevant. And someone
Yeah.
reposted it, and saying, oh, this looks just like now. I think one of them was the Nighthawks. I'm
Yes.
talking about the
Yeah. The
image, and
diner.
it's empty.
Yeah.
So,
Wow. Yeah, that's so true. That is exactly like scenes in New York. Did
mhm.
you are you still doing them or did you
So
stop?
I was just at the we were at the MoMA the other day, and I was like, oh, I was like, I should do it again. It was such a fun project, honestly. I
Yeah.
had such a blast just figuring out and then modeling the little parts of the paintings. A lot
Yeah.
of them are not proportionally correct, as you know. So
Sure. Yeah. Did you feel like that improved your rendering skills or did you learn certain things? I guess you were talking about lighting and hidden lights and stuff like that. Did it impact your renderings at all?
yeah, it definitely helped a lot. At the time, it was actually using V-Ray as a
Mm.
rendering engine, so it did help a lot. I'd say that. Yeah, it just also seeing the composition, right? The compositions and the colors.
Yeah. Yeah. And did it give you like other ideas? I feel like I've been looking to analog like kind of paintings, actual paintings, much more, as well as photography for inspiration for images, more now than before, which is kind of interesting. With more technology happening, I'm looking more
More
analog.
at the other way around.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, for inspiration.
I think the best thing about it is also understanding the colors, right? The colors, how they are in complete harmony. Because when you look at the real world, we all have this sort of association with like the tree is green and then, the sky is blue. But when you look at the paintings, you're actually seeing the brush strokes of the paint that's being used. And you see that it's not just the blue, it's not just the green, right? So then when you go and you make your materials, it teaches you to look at the color a little bit different and how that it
Mm.
affects the overall composition.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Yulia, what advice would you give an ArchViz artist starting out in the industry now?
So for those who want to go into and work in the studio, I mean, there are people who only want to work in art with studios. Um, I'd say learn lighting techniques. I think that's the best one, and just and then the style of that art with studio, because each studio has a little bit different approaches and unique ways. So if you want to go that route, then more technical skills, but also think about how would you lead a meeting? So a little bit of those for that practice. If you want to go the route of freelance and opening your own studio later on, I'd say you need to network first, because your clients will come from architects, developers, real estate. So don't go networking in 3D community.
Right.
It's
Yeah.
nice to be in 3D community, but unfortunately, render is not going to be your client. So if you're looking to start your own studio, I'd say you need to first have a base of clients and architects that, friends who are architects, friends who are real estate developers, who then later on will become your clients.
Yeah. So what do you think? It's like ask your friends, ask around, or are there any resources you even could recommend?
I'd say actually go to events. I mean, recently, just this fall, we had Architectonic. Oh, sorry, not Architectonic. October event, and they had a few talks. Some of them were within an architecture studio. So, just go to those events, introduce yourself to people, introduce yourself to architects.
Great. I think that's really great advice. Thank you so much for joining. And it was great to get your insight on how an artist can start their own studio and the state of the industry at the moment, and really hopeful for things we can improve in the future. So thank you so much for coming on. It was great to have you.
Thank you, Michelle. Thanks.